This whole world is against us. Either we tiptoe through it smiling so as not to disrupt anything, or we push against it, knowing we'll be pushed back, or we disguise ourselves within it, trying to convince one another that it also belongs to us. But it doesn't. This world wasn't built for us. It's full of violence and shame and secrets, full of starving people and abandoned people, dead people waiting for release. I am so tired of trying to follow these invisible rules, of transforming myself into the shape of what's expected. Cordelia says, "But what else can we do?" Goneril replies, "We can take it apart." For me, that passage is essentially the mission statement of Erin Shields' play Queen Goneril. This is a King Lear adaptation, fairly obviously. Goneril is one of the central figures of Shakespeare's King Lear, and Shields is an amazing adapter. Shields has done a number of plays in which she has adapted classical works for contemporary issues, particularly feminist issues around not only sort of material concerns, control of one's own life, one's own destiny, etc., but also control of classical texts, the way in which the traditional Western literary canon privileges male authors, male-centered texts, and when women are central in those texts, it tends to be in a sort of controlling way, right? These tend to be texts that are very focused on teaching women how to behave properly from a male author's or a patriarchal social perspective. Shields loves taking these things apart, and she's really, really good at it. And Queen Goneril is no exception. So this play actually signals that sort of intent right from the beginning. Before we even actually get to the Lear adaptation itself, we have the prologue in which Henry and Roz are sort of being interviewed. Henry is the actor who will play Lear in this meta-theatrical or frame narrative upcoming production of King Lear, and Roz is the actor who will play Goneril. One of the things that is striking about this mock interview is how much more Henry talks than Roz. And this is very common, of course. In Western societies, patriarchal societies, men are trained to talk over women, and women are trained to allow themselves to be talked over by men. But the question also gets raised in this mock interview about Shakespearean or sort of canonical roles for women, because Roz points out that for classically trained male actors, Hamlet is the young man's part, and Lear is the older actor's part. And these are things that people sort of build their careers around doing. They aspire to play these roles. And Henry claims that there's some great Shakespearean roles for women, and he points to Juliet. And what Roz says is, sure, but no actor playing Juliet has control over her career. An actress is chosen to play Juliet, and who knows where her career goes from there, after she's out of ingenue range. An actor playing Lear, on the other hand, chooses to play that role. It's about control. And so this is a really important component of this. This theme of control and who is in control within social situations, political situations, cultural situations, but also within the sort of canon of classical or traditional literature. what we get in the sort of actual play itself, following this frame narrative that introduces this central theme, we have a play set, a prequel, basically, about 7 years or so before the action of Shakespeare's King Lear itself. Lear is already an old man. He's already, his faculties are already failing him. He's already on the decline. And Goneril is the natural successor as the oldest of his children. She has spent years sort of preparing herself, studying Lear's decision-making, studying military tactics, studying court etiquette, the ways in which the court functions and the monarch maintains control and things like this. So Goneril has really prepared herself for this role in a way that we don't ever see in Shakespeare, right? And in Shields' version, Goneril is not scheming. She's not power hungry. She's not grasping for unearned control. She has put in a substantial amount of work, and she recognizes the real legitimate limitations to Lear's abilities in his old age. She is attempting to do what she sees as best for the kingdom. It's a perfectly justifiable position. The problem is, well, there's several problems, one of which is Lear has no interest in retiring. It's simply not something he is even considering, despite the fact that he really, really should be, because he's making terrible decisions and he's not recognizing the consequences of those decisions. There are also substantial concerns about whether or not this male-dominated court will accept a female sovereign. And there are still questions about whether Goneril is ready to rule, although she seems less concerned about that. And it does seem like a lot of those questions are rooted in patriarchal assumptions about the limitations of women. But we have another set of central characters here who are developed in much more detail and in much more interesting, complex ways than they are in Shakespeare. The two sisters, Regan and Cordelia, are central to this play as well. And then there's an old woman, a nurse or whatever it is, somebody who, in Shakespeare, she would probably be called a nurse, but basically she's like a chambermaid sort of thing. Over the course of the play, each of these major female characters has at least one apostrophe, at least one speech to the audience in which they explain their worldview. They explain how they approach things and why they approach things the way that they do. So Regan is, I guess in a sense, she is like Princess Margaret from like the 1950s and 60s. So Queen Elizabeth in the UK, this is my sense of it, and I'm not a specialist in this, but my sense of it is that Elizabeth, especially after her coronation, felt that she had to be very reserved, very proper, very sort of stable, status quo, etc., etc., whereas her sister Margaret was kind of more like, hey, it's the late 50s into the 60s. We're starting the counterculture revolution. I'm gonna have some fun. I'm gonna go around with men. I'm gonna drink alcohol. I'm gonna smoke. I'm gonna do stuff that's fun. I'm gonna dance. I'm gonna do whatever. Hip young person stuff. My sense is Regan is kind of in that vein. She wants to have fun. She wants to have sex with men. She wants to sort of be admired, etc., etc. But the thing that's important about it is not that in itself. This isn't decadent hedonism for the sake of decadent hedonism. This is Regan trying to find her place in the world. And she feels like, so Cordelia always goes around smiling. We'll talk about Cordelia. She's really fascinating here. But she always goes around smiling. She's always sort of happy and optimistic and perky and whatever. And Regan finds that incredibly irritating. Goneril, again, is this very sort of proper, regal, I'm going to be the queen, I have to do things right kind of person. And so Regan doesn't really have a place in this schema. So she turns to this sort of enjoyment, this sort of decadence, but it's about establishing some sort of power, some sort of control in this world where she doesn't feel that she has a particular place and she doesn't feel that she has any control. Because the last bit of her monologue in scene 4 is, I long to touch and be touched. I want to sweat and be hunted. I need to writhe with heat, and that desire is seeping through my pores. I want a man to smell it, to need it, to surrender himself to me. And so that idea, again, I think that last line really is revelatory about Regan's approach to the world. She has no power. She's the middle child. She's not going to be queen. She is not, like, there isn't anything for her other than to sort of get married and just be ornamental. And so that idea of, I can establish power by making people want me, that becomes this sort of shaping force in her worldview. We have the old woman. We get her monologue, I think, in section 2, Act 2, scene 2. She talks about her suffering in life. You find me a woman who's raised 4 sons and sent them off to be slaughtered at war, raised 3 daughters only to have them all die in childbirth, been told where to go and what to do by men that range from husband to king, and I'll show you a woman who will dig through a bowl of shit to find a bit of gold she knows is there. Because this is what we find her doing, digging through Lear's chamber pot. And we learn that she gives him these foods, she prepares him these foods that she knows will sort of pull the gold fillings out of his teeth, these sticky foods and things like this, these sweet, decadent foods. And she knows he will swallow that gold, he will pass it, and then she can find it. And it is about doing what you need to do to survive in a world with very few options and very few, like, no social safety net, no security whatsoever for her, etc., etc. And then we have Cordelia. Cordelia, I think, here is fascinating because, I mean, Cordelia she's a weird character in Shakespeare's King Lear as well. What her actual motivation is when she says nothing is never really clear. There's some sense that this is about scrupulous honesty, but it's scrupulous honesty to the detriment of everyone around her. And even to her own detriment. So it's always a weird bit. But here we have something of an explanation. So again, Cordelia goes around smiling all the time. She comforts everybody. She is there in a supporting role in her own life, essentially. And what she says here, this is, I think, maybe Act 2, Scene 4. Yeah, Act 2, Scene 4. She says, my sisters think I'm stupid. They think I don't understand complicated things because I wear a pleasant disguise. The truth is, I'm only happy because all the unhappy spaces in this palace are already taken. All the angry spaces, too. All the jealous spaces. And the lonely spaces. Even as a baby, I could sense the longing. I killed my mother the day I was born, so they left me alone as a child. Every now and then I was rocked by a nurse or prodded by my sisters, and if they cried, they left me to my misery. But if I smiled, I can melt sorrow with my smile, unfix scowls with my smile, stop arguments with my smile. When father's in one of his furies, I lay my head on his shoulder, stroke his beard, and draw tears of joy from his eyes, and so I smile. But my sisters mock me for it. They don't know the chore of being good, of saying things I know that other people want to hear, of never making trouble, of holding in the rage. I'm finding it harder and harder to keep the shape that everyone expects. There's a heaviness inside me, like the world is pressing in, like I can't be good anymore. And that, really is a strikingly interesting speech, because it really centers the burden of emotional labor, which disproportionately falls on women in patriarchal societies. Women constantly need to sort of support and cater to the emotional needs and whims of those around them, particularly men. This is a well-documented phenomenon. There's substantial amounts of data to support this. And so we have, but the thing that ultimately is interesting with these four different characters, Goneril, Regan, the old woman, and Cordelia, is we have this constellation of the limitations on women's experience in a patriarchal society, and still to today. And so what ends up sort of happening is this temporary alliance between the four women. After Regan is raped by one of Lear's courtiers, she flees the palace. Goneril goes after her to try and find out what is wrong and try and help her sister. Cordelia goes out as well to try and help her sisters, and the old woman follows Cordelia, basically to try and take care of all of them. And they develop this sort of plan. I'm not going to go into the details of the plan. Basically, it involves correcting a mistake that Lear has made and then has not corrected himself. But this sort of temporary union of the sisters and the old woman is then kind of broken when they return to the castle. Goneril finally persuades Lear to actually give up the throne, to let her take the throne in his place. But then he undermines that. He arranges a marriage between Regan and Cornwall, the Duke of Cornwall. And then the end of the play, Goneril says, "Father." Lear says, "Yes, my dear." Goneril says, "Have you no other announcements to make?" Lear says, "Not at this time, my love. I wouldn't want to overshadow your sister's big day. But soon, soon." And then he toasts Goneril, or he toasts Regan and Cornwall. And then in the final stage directions, it says, "All cheer. Optimism drains from Goneril's face. Cool resolve settles in. An image of Roz from the beginning of the play. The two exist together. Blackout." So Lear basically figures out that he can have agreed to make Goneril queen, to abdicate his throne or step down, but then if he just doesn't ever actually do it, there's nothing she can do.